Parataxe digital.
Austalgie und Expatriotismus. I couldn't say this in English. I had to say it in German because this pun was made by our beloved curator, Alex Wells. And he's also the one who will open the next panel with a keynote speech. And I'm very thankful to cooperate with him. The mic is yours, Alexander Wells.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Martin. Let me begin by reading you a tweet by a DJ. Kid in Berlin, 2040. I'm the child of immigrants. We were very poor. In 2013, my parents left their home country of Melbourne in search of more authentic parties and cheaper K. They never learned the language and spent 30 years working in cafes. Someday I hope to be a doctor. When I set about reflecting on the relationship between Antipodean writers in Berlin, this tweet kept drifting into my head. For one thing, it's pretty funny. It's by Roland Tings, by the way, I should cite him. Also a good producer. But it also seems to hint at so many of the elements central to the Berlin Down Under experience. Our cringing self-irony, our insecure monolingualism, our hunger for authenticity, and our rightful sense that we don't quite fit into established narratives about migration or exchange. And there's that ever-present anxiety here too, about how long we are all really planning to stay. Frequently one wonders if one is an expat or a migrant, a Peter Pan party tourist, or a creative exile forced out of unaffordable, culture-hating cities back home. That 2040 child is the ghost at our feast, the putting down of roots that we just can't quite imagine. The same uncertainty applies to our literary offspring as well. Is it a tourist literature, a migrant literature, an Exil- und Exklav-Literatur, or is it an Australian or Aotearoa New Zealand literature that just so happens to have been typed up somewhere else? The Australian and Aotearoa New Zealand writing community of Berlin is not particularly close-knit. Some of us know some of us, many of us know none of us. We have German friends and English friends and American friends and Indian friends. We are diverse and dispersed. Not only do we resist being understood within national tradition in the normal ways, plonked into a tribe without your consent, as the Australian poet Nam Lay puts it, but we are also writers who have chosen, for various reasons, to turn away from the centres of canonisation back home. People are often surprised about where we come from, having taken us for more regularly occurring Anglophone elements. This might also have to do with their stereotyped mental image of our homelands. White beaches, white surfers, the Lord of the Rings. Once I interviewed an older Czech-German author, an experimental poet turned novelist from Prenzlauberg, with unsettlingly lively eyes, and he asked me woher in America I come from. I countered that I was Australian. He lit up. Mad Max, he shouted. Mad Max! I lifted an eyebrow. I thought you were an army, he explained, breathless, but you are actually a Mad Max from the Mad Max land. He was stunned to discover I'd never seen the film. If anything unites Antipodean authors' relation to Berlin, it is the very fact that we are very, very far from home. It's literally the other side of the world, hence the word Antipodes. Although for people born and raised down under, it's surreal to grow up referring to our region in terms of it being the opposite of some totally other place. Remoteness is the sheerest fact about us. It's also something that marks us out from the Irish and English, who can board a €40 budget flight spontaneously, and from the Americans, whose flight home is longer and pricier, but who are easily able to inhabit the US internet, the US literary world, and the US global monoculture while being based in Berlin. In 2025, nobody ever really leaves the American sector. For Antipodeans, by contrast, Berlin is a place both distant and unstoried. Unstoried, that is, by us. If you move to London or New York, you're riding the natural flow of ambitious young people to the metropolis. You're also following the footsteps of Clive James, Christina Stead, or Catherine Mansfield. Living in Berlin, though, has little by way of an established literary pathway. There was Elizabeth von Arnim long ago. Nick Cave wrote And the Ass Saw the Angel here. Yet the most prominent icon of Antipodean Berlin literary exchange is probably the feral creature who gives his name to the Kangaroo Chronicles. To older folks back home, the move to Berlin seems sort of random. When we're quizzed as to why we came, we often answer with something like, oh yeah, you know, no real reason. Of course, there are always reasons. Berlin is queer-friendly. Its multilingualness is more intentional, more integral than that of our homelands. The rent was cheap. The public transport good was the lifestyle urban and European in a way that suburban, sprawling Antipodean cities can't quite match. The KSK, the Stipendium für Nicht-Deutsche Literatur, and all the indie bookstores here also seem as exotic and unbelievable to me as emus and kiwi birds do to locals. Some people, a minority, come because they love German or the Germans. Others seem drawn to Berlin's history itself, as such, the traces and caesura of which are worn more proudly than what we all have back home. To settlers at least, to white settlers at least, the new world can seem ahistorical. Berlin, by contrast, feels historically overburdened. It is a city of ruins, dreams, nightmares, possibility. A.L. McCann's 2005 novel Subtopia is driven by this contrast between Berlin's thrilling ruination and the end-of-history drift of a shallow, unchanging Australian suburbia. Its protagonist Julian and his wild friend Martin leave their boring suburb to participate in gritty, radical Kreuzberg. Yet Julian discovers that his life here has been an empty fantasy, its radical politics a mirage. So he returns melancholically to Australia, settles down to a house in Melbourne, gets married. Berlin might be wild, but real life means suburban normality. The same arc applies to Anna Funder's Stasiland. Sniff. A more or less non-fictional travelogue about the GDR's atrocities. Funder explicitly styles this book after Alice in Wonderland. Her researching narrator is constantly disbelieving about how awful East Germany was and is. The narrator encounters an evil queen of hearts. She describes a world of inconceivable evil, condescends East Germans' post-war lives as being curiouser and curiouser. Then she shoots back through the looking glass to her innocent reality back home, an untainted corner of the world that apparently has no unethical border regime, no policing scandals, and no colonial past worth writing about. After all, the really bad stuff happens here, Berlin, the dark heart of Europe. Antipodean literature has long had to handle its relationship to the Old World, which culturally dominated our settler colonies long after independence. When last century's authors staged their encounters with the continent, they shaped Aussie and Kiwi identity in partial revolt against staid cultural authorities of London, Oxbridge, and Paris, or they stayed there. This century, our authors are also writing about Berlin, a city of radically different cultural cadence. The foremost genre is the expat novel, or some variation on the theme. A young person comes to the city and feels past haunted and/or freedom excited before realizing that their real life is back home and that the baggage they brought with them is what they really should be unpacking. The most interesting of these, perhaps even a variation, is A Guide to Berlin by Gail Jones. This novel features a lost young literary woman from Australia named Cass, who falls in with a group of international Nabokov fans. The group meets up in empty apartments for speak memory-inspired storytelling sessions. They each offer narratives related to their homeland's national traumas, Auschwitz, Bologna, Ahikikomori. When Cass's turn comes, however, she flubs her lines. She runs off. She's unwilling or unable to claim herself a place in this anthology. By the end, it becomes clear that this is not a novel of solipsistic Australian Ruinenlust, but a novel about it. Berlin itself continues as real. What vanishes into smoke is the needy pose of the expat. The Berlin visitation literature, then, seems to turn on the collision of bored, innocent, far-off Antipodeans and the city of Berlin, a place that still somehow entertains radical dreams, but at the price of a crushing historical weight, perhaps also a dizzying solipsism. But what of those who do stay, at least indefinitely? Some cross the language barriers, as we've just seen, others do not. Our panellists today and others have founded magazines, taught workshops, translated great German literature, written historical fiction and non-fiction about Berlin's multivalent past. Even for those Antipodeans who don't engage with Berlin per se, the city's traces show up everywhere. It is surely no coincidence that echoes, distances, birds, and radio transmissions can be traced throughout the Down Underers literature. Chunks of Deutsch and English show up as trace elements in almost everyone's conglomerate poems. And how many Antipodean authors have casually picked up a local book or another, a local influence or another, and carried it with them slyly into their work? And who knows how many books have been enabled by Berlin's cheaper rent, its more permissive social mores, its distance from the various peer pressures of home. In 2012, a cluster of public institutions put on a remarkable literary exchange. 3 poets from Germany were flown to Aotearoa, New Zealand, to experience the transit of Venus with 3 local poets. All of them wrote about it. Then they met in Berlin to translate one another. The transit of Venus is important to the Maori. At the same time, Captain Cook's 1769 voyage was officially made in order to observe it from Tahiti. It's both an icon of global learning and an omen for European colonial atrocity. A poem contributed to the project by Uwe Kolber began like this. Aus einem arroganten Land komme ich, da weiß ich die Namen, habe sie selbst im Überschwang reichlich verteilt, ob eines es wollte, ob nicht. But then that arrogant country sinks under the horizon. It is suddenly not to be seen, and the German poet speaker finds himself unworded. Nun zieht die Sonne namenlos droben und spurlos die Frau ohne Mund vorbei. Years later, Hina Moana Baker, one of the poets involved in the project, moved to Berlin. In her collection Funkhaus, she writes, "Your Berlin sends roots down through its dead. Its building and its total recall shake with trains. Words are gold bricks of lights in the season." Throughout Berlin's Down Under literature, both Europe and the New World find themselves transformed. The encounter with the other, with the antipode, can rearrange us inside and out. Far-flung as we are, we offer an alienation effect to the city, and it offers us one back, the alienation of ourselves, as well as of our opposite, no less arrogant homelands. Last time I visited my family in Australia, it took me a while to readjust. The money was strange and the accents were strange. I simply could not believe the sun or the birds. I kept wanting to say, "Genau!" My at-homeness was there within me, but buried under a thin layer of topsoil. Or else it had been hybridized, two plants forced together on one stem, now unrecognizable each way. There's no real reason for Antipodeans to be here, no real reason for the Germans to take an interest in us. But sometimes it's the unreal that generates the conditions fit for literature. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for that amazing introduction. It was a hoot. This panel is called Home and Away, Berlin Writing Between Austalgie and Expatriotism. I'm going to start by introducing the artists on this panel, and they're going to give a reading of their work so that you have a better understanding of where they're coming from as artists and thinkers. And then we'll discuss. Basically, what I'm interested in doing today is kind of tracing the psychic, political, material appearances of place in the work of these artists, both Australian traces and German traces, and there are perhaps other international traces in their work. So I will begin by introducing Barbara Ivusic. Barbara is an established Australian editor and emerging author who has been living in Berlin for more than half a decade. She studied English literature at the University of Sydney and publishing and creative writing at the University of Technology in Sydney. In 2023, Barbara received the Berlin Senate Stipend for Literature, and her fiction has been published internationally in magazines such as Island, Sprachen, I don't speak German and I don't pretend to, Glitter and Tears in the Fence, as well as in the anthologies Resilience, Beyond Queer Words. In 2025, she was shortlisted for the Westwards Novel Prize in Sydney, and she's going to read an excerpt from the manuscript which had her shortlisted for that prize. Barbara.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so this is just a small extract. It's called Hevelin Farm. I nodded like a child that was about to get an ice cream, then got into the passenger's seat as the aircon smacked my face. Evelyn smelled freshly showered, a scent I couldn't unravel, something between dried oranges and moss. She took my hand to position it under hers on the transmission knob, and I felt the car vibrate as she changed gears on the way down the long highway towards the drier suburbs, the thick west, or as everyone called it, the sticks. Gum trees interrupted my view of the farms that emerged on either side of us as cattle grazed on what was left. The dams looked blue from the reflection of the sky, many conquered by thin carpets of lily pads and wiry water plants. It hadn't rained for months, and here you could definitely feel it. The smell of manure entered the car through the vents and my body tensed when we hit the dusty road on her farm's driveway. I couldn't grasp where the property started or where it ended. When we reached a pair of 6-foot gates, I was surprised to see 2 landlocked Angus. "Damn things must have gotten over," Evelyn said absent-mindedly. "They'll scatter, it's fine." She put the car in neutral and revved the engine up. Dust enshrouded us, but we stood still. She then accelerated towards them and braked quickly. I don't know what she thought and where she thought they would go, but when they ran into the barbed wire, my stomach twisted. One managed to leap over, but the other got tangled, then moaned in the most ear-chilling baritone I had ever heard. Evelyn stepped out of the car and walked casually towards it, then knelt down to free its legs, but couldn't. So she went back and rummaged through the back of the ute. "Can I help?" I asked, but she ignored my question, then grabbed a set of pliers, went back, swished spectator flies away from her face, then cut it loose. It limped towards the eroded semi-island of the closest dam, then stood in the mud while Evelyn planted her sweaty face in front of the air conditioner. Her fringe was stuck to her forehead, and her nose looked like she had peeled the skin off it recently. "Whose cows are they?" I asked, finally able to relax. "The cowman," she said in between sips of water from her silver thermos. "What about the gash on its leg?" "Cowman." We continued to drive down the dirt road until we got to a set of metal silos and a huge shed which stood open to reveal bright yellow machinery and a tractor. On one side of the shed there were pipes poking out of strands of dead thistle, but on the other, the same plant flourished with purple flowers. 2 kelpies ran up towards the car, bouncing up and down to see us. But we went down a tighter road towards a secluded patch where a mint-coloured fibro house greeted us. It had a concrete deck that embraced about half of it, and a fig tree with the sign on it written in white paint, Lumia. It stood elevated on a weak hill with a view of an empty paddock in which the grass was knee-high. I couldn't help but picture snakes travelling through the crispness. "That's where I want to set up the dog breeding kennels." She pointed to a set of barns in the paddock. None of them had doors, and their floors were covered with mounds of dry cow poo. I nodded as we parked inside a tin shed, its metal roof hovering over us, opening and closing its mouth as the hot wind shot through it. It sounded like a ship sinking. "The kids should be here somewhere," Evelyn said, twirling her car keys in her hand. She did a long beep, then 2 short bird-like squeaks. There was a patch of green in front of the house where a sprinkler was leaking and forming muddy rivers in between the roots of the fig tree. Miniature cows and horses gathered around the small pool. Some were resting on strands of hay, while others had their muzzles in the water. I heard playful screams coming from behind the house, and as we approached, I saw a boy and girl standing naked in a trough in which the water was the colour of whiskey. The girl was taller than the boy, their skin so tanned that their eyes stood out. "Rebecca, Jacob, say hi to Helen," Evelyn called out. "It's Ellena," I said, with an A at the end. "Same thing, isn't it?" She shrugged. "But we're naked," Rebecca announced, jumping out of the trough to grab her clothes. "We can see that," Evelyn said. "Where's Gabe?" "Getting the fire started." Jacob pointed to the other side of the house. I wiped the sweat that was gathering at my hairline with the sleeve of my shirt, then looked for a patch of shade to sit under. "Is that cow poo that smells so bad?" I asked the kids. "Nope, it's the tip." Rebecca pointed to a dirt mountain a few kilometres away where there were trucks working to shape masses of garbage into sizable hills. Despite the distance, it smelt fresh. "Mum says it smells like vomit," Jacob said. "No, it's more like rotten stuff and poo," Rebecca laughed. "No, it's vomit," Jacob asserted. "Maybe it's a mix of all of that," I cut in. Evelyn came up behind me and placed her hand on my neck, then used her forefinger to gently rub it. From the corner of my eye, I saw a man come out from the other side of the house carrying a stack of wood in a crate. He walked to the cylinder on the lawn and threw some logs into it. When he turned to us, I saw that he had an axe in his hand and dried blood on his hairy arms. With the posture of a tree and tousled hair, he spoke through the wedges of his broken teeth. "Want any more, Eve?" "That's all I need, Gabe," she said. "And thanks for looking after the kids." She handed him a beer out of the esky on the floor. He took it, nodded at me, then walked up the driveway, swaying like an old rag in the wind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so gloriously Australian.
I picked that scene for that.
Mikaella Clements is an Australian writer who's been based in Berlin since 2016. With her wife, Julie Data, she is the author of Feast While You Can, an exciting new hybrid horror romance novel in which queer desire is the cure, not the curse. I'm reading it at the moment. It's fucking fabulous. And The View Was Exhausting, which came out in 2021, which was named as a perfect summer read by Vogue. Her short stories have been anthologized in Best Summer Stories, Kill Your Darlings, New Australian Fiction, and her fiction, non-fiction, has been published in Hazlitt, Catapult, Overland, Literary Journal, and more. Mikaella is going to read from her and Anja's latest manuscript, Last Orders, which is set in Berlin at the end of the world and is currently on submission. So wish her luck.
So miserable. I'm going to do something dangerous and read about a German, so apologies in advance. And so it was just Matilda and Donna who made the long, arduous journey to Lübeck. Donna drove and Matilda smoked the whole way, drowsily high while the flatlands of Germany rolled past. Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, forget about it. Wind turbines for days, herds of them stretching into the distance, rusty and exhausted and some missing arms, so they flailed like wounded soldiers on the fields. Matilda loved Berlin, but she hated Germany, and she hated her grandmother for dying, and her own dormant sense of duty for propelling her out into the heartland of mulch. She got changed in the car. Donna had brought a shirt for her, black silk with a dainty pussy bow collar. She couldn't fit into any of Donna's trousers, so she'd brought her nicest pair of sweatpants. Donna wondered aloud if it was offensive to wear sweatpants to a funeral, but they were pure wool, vintage Hugo Boss. How could Matilda's grandmother complain? In the end, none of the assorted mourners paid much mind to Matilda's outfit. There were only a handful of people, old and unmoving like cold clay statues. There was something so viscerally Lübeck about it all, the smell of mothballs and the dimness of the church, the faded painting of Jesus on the wall, striding over the waves toward a shipwrecked crew of North German fishermen who gazed out at the congregation with flat disdain. It all felt too familiar, too much like being 16 and motherless and shipped out here from Berlin for lack of any other living relatives. Matilda and her mother had not been close, but they had tolerated each other, and her mother hadn't cared to intervene in Matilda's life. Instead, Lena watched, inscrutable at the kitchen table, when Matilda trooped home after a long night out with her friends and their fake IDs. As a teenager, Matilda wore big cargo pants and bigger T-shirts. She had an often infected septum piercing. She chased nearly every girl who crossed her path and got more than a few of them. Her mother never said anything, so she kept bringing more girls home, waiting for her mother to speak, and she was still waiting when that guy on Karl-Marx-Strasse made the illegal U-turn and hit Lena head-on. And then exiled to Lübeck, where no one said anything about her being gay either, with the implication that it would be embarrassing if anyone noticed. At school, Matilda swaggered in ready for the poor, huddled masses to come crawling to her for capital enlightenment. She felt so obviously superior. But coolness had a different, preppier metric in Lübeck, and no one wanted Matilda's grunge or Club One wisdom. Girls wore tight blonde braids and giggled behind their hands at her. When she came into the locker room, they changed behind closed cubicle doors. "You would be pretty if you lost like 6 kilos, one girl said kindly. "You're kind of fat skinny." "I wouldn't even fuck a bitch like you," Matilda said, "let alone listen to you." Matilda walked around Lübeck with her hands bunched into fists and her hair lank with grease, robbed of her pride in being a Berliner, a capital city kid, a Kiez kid, on first-name terms with a dozen bouncers, decent at skateboarding and disdainful of tourists. What identity was there to be found in Lübeck? She thought once she turned 18 and got back to Berlin, things would improve, but actually everything had only been worse. Although Matilda had longed for Berlin, Berlin seemed not to have noticed her absence. It had moved on, water flowing in to fill the whole of her departure, and transformed Matilda into a stupid child from the provinces, floundering in the high flood of her capital. She couldn't find a place to live, and fell into a cycle of short-term leases and confrontational flat shares. Matilda did not like any of her flatmates, but it still came as an embarrassing and painful surprise that they did not like her either. She got turfed out for using too many plastic bags in her supermarket trips, or accidentally leaving her stereo blaring techno. Even when she tried to be friendly, she just didn't have the knack for conversation, and her clumsy overtures were overshadowed by the vegetables she allowed to rot in communal fridges. University did not offer alternatives. Too often she got stoned by midday, slinking only to classes with the most rigorous attendance regulations. She had no skill for small talk. She skulked at the back of every room, hood up and eyes red-rimmed from smoke and another late night with her laptop. Finally, a butch sat next to her during a seminar on the psychology of sex. Halfway through the lesson, she leaned over and said, "You're a lesbian, right?" The words rang in Matilda's ears, and she couldn't understand why until she realized that nobody had ever actually asked her before. "Yeah." "Phew," the girl said. "I don't want to talk to heterosexuals about this anymore." She held out her hand. "I'm Berta." Matilda felt something move inside her. Laughter, she realized. She jerked her head away and frowned hard. She wouldn't be desperate. She had once ruled Neukölln. She couldn't slink over to the first person who paid her some attention and rub herself against their legs and yowl. Later, Berta used the same metaphor. "You made me look like such a fucking tool," she said on Matilda's birthday. "Like one of those losers who won't just give up and admit the pet doesn't like them. No, I'm kneeling on the ground with my fingers out, trying not to make eye contact. Oh, psst, 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 come on, kitty." And meanwhile, everyone's like, "Are you an idiot? That's not a house pet, that's a fucking bear, and it's going to rip your throat out." "But," Berta concluded, satisfied, "you were house trainable after all, and that's why I can put funny hats on you." She flicked the party hat currently sitting askew on Matilda's head. Her fingers brushing Matilda's hair made Matilda's heart thrum, not because she wanted to fuck Berta, but because Berta had kept pss-pss-pssing at her all through the hard and ugly winter, and because Matilda was more grateful to her than to any person she'd ever known. Also because by that point, Matilda loved her, though she was still a few years away from admitting it. After that first class, Berta started dragging her out to bars. Matilda told her, "We're not going to date, by the way. You're not my type." Berta yelped with laughter. "Yeah, I know I'm not, little dum-dum. Are you coming to this party with me? You can find someone who is your type." Matilda did, a tall, pretty femme called Cara. Berta gave Cara a lazy, appreciative look, and Matilda's stomach squirmed. She wanted Berta's approval of her conquest. She wanted Berta to feel jealous of Matilda, who was, after all, better looking than Berta. She wanted to fuck this girl, but she also didn't want to miss a moment of Berta's companionship, and she was jealous of Berta's other friends, who talked so fast and hailed Berta with such comfort. She made out with Cara, then got so fucked up that Berta ended up taking her home and staying the night, the two of them passing out on Matilda's futon of the month. In the morning, hungover and still drunk at once, Matilda confessed something of her turmoil, ready for Berta to recoil. So far, her rudeness hadn't scared Berta off. Maybe her honesty would. "What?" Berta said. "You never had a dyke friend before?"
Thank you. Tessa Sinclair Scott from Aotearoa, New Zealand, is a writer, designer, and author of the poetry collection Dream Houses. Tessa's work has been published in Dyslexia, Landfall, and Folly journals, among others, anthologized in Phoenix and the Duty of Disobedience anthology of the European Poetry Biennale. A member of the Berlin Poetry Collective, Tessa founded the Writers Who Write meetup in Hamburg and holds degrees in painting and design and a creative writing MA from the University of Sydney. Tessa is going to read 5 poems from her new manuscript.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction. I see that I've picked up an initial on my label. I'm happy to have that. Thank you, whoever did that. Okay, first poem is called Upside Down. You spin me inside out and round and round. I was born in spring, which is autumn here. I'm speaking to you from autumn now. It's all apple cider scented scratch and sniff red confusions here, with butter flip, buttermilk, butter-curled leaf layers, and peephole dawns, and other natural romances. I'm going to Berlin soon to watch a French miniseries dubbed into German and listen to an Icelandic writer with my Colombian boyfriend. I am from New Zealand, we say Aotearoa now, which means the land of the long white cloud. I'm not trying to be obscure. It's just how things turned out. We are old, but we are waiting. Hallo, liebe Frau, most esteemed of all, you are too late. The Frist has been gefressen. Oh, Herr, whatever could you mean by being so mean? Why ever do you squash my fingers in your desk so, making my scarlet blood flow? Liebe Frau, you are mistaken. I merely wish to help you create your own identity on this form, in triplicate, here, here, and here. Oh, Herr, my life thrice explained. I sell apples in a kiosk. I place the reddest, juiciest apples in brown bags, close them up with a flourish, and when day drains away, I hang a mirror ball in the sky, and under this crazed bulb, I sashay again the long white cloud path home, and when I tire, hands hand me sandwiches and bottles of water. Voices say, keep going. We are waiting for your return. We are old, but we are waiting. This is called Bus Sonnet 2. Just because the dress was on sale and I drove down to the outlet shop in Randwick on a Saturday, and it, hallelujah, actually fits me, and damn the 38 degrees and sweat trickling between my breasts, and bless my darling little panda eyes blinking back at me under fluoro tube lighting in the changing room mirror. The family are at the Coogee Bay Hotel. Aircon, broken. Bed's hard. My mother smiles, offers a shy Guten Tag to my new mother-in-law, who dabs her eyes with her sleeve hanky as the knife smashes through our names in icing curled across sweating ganache. Yellow-tinged frangipanis picked in the early morning cool are wilt brown in a wide bowl. The scent brings the room to strange dance moves and slurred speeches. The groom's brother flew in from Germany. Jet blurry under his mohawk, he perches on the edge of his chair, a black cockatoo swaying on a too spindly branch. Everything on him is wan. I can't stop laughing as I parrot the celebrant's vows. I just can't stop. Now, this poem's called Annunciation. Tookie and Frankie drove west to peel the painting of paradise off the great artist's kitchen wall. Easy does it. They flex the plywood backing. They saw the painting in two, shouldered out French doors up through wet bush, lash the panels to the top of the van. They gun it up Oti-Tori Bay Road, chop down through green tunnels and flicker-flick sunlight, filtering through ferns, and drop back to the mist-drunk Waitemata Harbour. They hang the painting above Tookie's table. In dull browns and sketchy ochres, two figures look up to the scumbled sky, its big eaves swerving curves and little Adam's dark curls, their shared rock-solid silence. A moon-faced angel looks down on Tookie's table and listens to the fridge humming and resetting day after day. Over a square of monkish blue, darkbirds drop through the valley. Tookie's wife blooms and fades, 4 children hatch and fly away. Now Frankie lies in Sydney dirt, and Tookie's steps are frail, eyes failing, passing the painting every day on his way to the kitchen for a cuppa. He smiles to be so near paradise. This is the last one. It's called Ascension. Mary is the next burial at the end of this coast road, where wide, branching, crimson-flowering pohutukawa trees reach calmly and attentively out over jade water, where beauty is easy, belonging less so. Pull up to the house, car doors, slamity-slam, roadside hugs, seats in the garden under rain-popped marquee and thunder under Mary's eulogy, the lark ascending, muffles out of a CD player. Bird light, Mary in her coffin is lifted too fast. She tips, is righted, raised higher. And we stand in a black block with grass squelch under soggy shoes, waiting for the storm to break, and when it drops, our burdens lift, and Mary rises from her narrow box, hovers over yellow petals, stuck to brick paths. She wafts over trestles of banana cake. A melody line she slips from her closed piano. walks down to the swimming hole, feels 4 fat eels under the overhang, runs up the bank, over roots. She jumps to grip the rope swing. She careens out over the water. She lets go and belongs completely to the dark green eye of the pool, wherein an eel prince flows out from the bank and asks, "Mary, is that you?" Thank you.
Thank you, all of you. I guess I want to start by kind of acknowledging that we're all, the three of you are writing formally, stylistically, thematically, very differently, right? But why we're all on this table is because you're all writing in English while you're living in a German context, and that's a really particular experience. And you've all been based here for quite some time, and so you have some experience of, it's a problematic term, but expatriate life. We can problematize that term a little bit later. And what I'm interested in asking you about is how Germany shows up in your work, how New Zealand and Australia shows up in your work, and your experience of living here as an expat. First, before we go into the kind of the place thing, I want to ask, why do you live here? The most annoying question every foreigner gets. And I want you to tell me first the kind of shorthand bullshit answer that you give strangers to just get on with it. And then I want you to maybe answer in the expanded version and maybe the more honest version. Barbara, why do you live here?
Why do I live here? The place just kind of accepted me, and I wasn't planning on coming here, but when I did come, everything fell into place. Mm-hmm. So that's the short answer.
And the real answer?
The real answer is I left Australia in a very disorientated state, and I wasn't planning on going anywhere, really. I left Australia very quickly after having been there for 26 years. Mm-hmm. And I had a return ticket that I didn't use. So, I spent some time with my parents, and they're in Croatia, and then I came to Berlin I just applied for work everywhere, and there was a job opening, and I just came here. I think I needed a place to retreat.
Thank you.
Why do I live here?
Why do you live here?
Good question. I mean, I like rules and regulations. So I don't want to offend anyone, but, a place where I can wait for the light to turn green before I walk and not have to make that decision to jaywalk. I like that. That's my bullshit answer, I think.
That's the bullshit answer? Yeah. And the real answer?
The real answer is through a series of bizarre personal connections, including meeting a backpacker in New Zealand 30 years ago and then coming to visit him, and then all sorts of personal reasons later, just my life ended up here. I think it was quite random, actually. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
My bullshit answer is that I was living in the UK and I wanted to do my master's, and as a foreign student in the UK that would have cost about £80,000 or something, and here it's free. So that was a very easy decision. But really, my family has like a very kind of weird... My parents lived in Berlin in the 90s. My mum was a journalist. She came over to cover the fall of the Berlin Wall, working for AAP. My dad was in a band. I think she paid his way. And I was born here, and my sister was born here too. And the family stayed in Berlin until 1995, and then they went back to Australia. So I grew up in Australia. I don't remember really living in Berlin. There's like videos of me speaking, sadly, much better German than I speak now. But Berlin was kind of like this weird, like almost like a bit of family mythology. It was, the kind of golden years of my parents' youth. They never ceased to remind me that it was much cooler in the 90s than it is now. And it was sort of this place that sort of drew us back. And I finally went for the first time as an adult, but with my mum when I was 21. And I was kind of like, this place, really? Like, it was the coldest March in 16 years or something like that. It was minus 13 degrees. There was snow everywhere. I think there's this sense of Berlin in the winter where it's like, or sadly in the spring as it was, where it feels very much like a closed place and you have to kind of know where to go, and I did not know where to go, and my mum also kind of didn't really know what to do. So it was a weird time, and then my wife was studying German and did a semester abroad here in Berlin, and that was when the city kind of opened itself up for me, and I was like, okay, no, I get it. And I've been getting it since then, slowly.
So that's the real answer.
That's the real answer, yeah.
And okay, your new novel is set in Berlin, but I think there's something interesting about your writing and Onja's writing, which is that place is kind of in the background and characters in the foreground, and a lot of your fiction could kind of happen anywhere. And so I want to ask you about, like, what's in your process of writing fiction, how consciously or unconsciously are you thinking about place in the actual work, and how are you living your life in Berlin that kind of enables you to write fiction? Does it help living here?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer your second question first, absolutely it helps. I mean, I know Berlin is much more expensive than it used to be. It's still so much more affordable than living in the UK or living in Melbourne. You know, my sister in Melbourne has just moved into her first share house, and she pays the same amount for this, like, very sweet but tiny little room, like, out in the northern suburbs that Onja and I pay for our whole flat. So, yeah, I think economically Berlin still enables you to eke out a living here as a writer, and, you know, writers don't get paid a huge amount, and then I write with another person, so we're splitting that amount between two already. And I feel really grateful for that, and for that kind of privilege to be able to live and write here. And then in terms of place in my writing, I think it's very much like, it does feel like a problem in some ways. I don't think I ever have like an instinctive, this should be set here, perhaps with the exception of the Berlin novel that I read an excerpt from, which kind of arose as a Berlin novel and could only have been set in Berlin. But I have this kind of complicated approach to place because I'm Australian, but I've lived my entire adult life essentially overseas. And yet when you're living overseas, you kind of, I feel like you always have this sense of yourself as an outsider. And so can you do that thing that writers should be able to do really well, which is like completely inhabit a place and bring someone into a world that you know so intimately. I worry about that with the Berlin novel. You know, like, my Berlin is not everybody's Berlin, and I've been here for 9 years almost, and it still doesn't feel like I've more than kind of scratched the surface of this city. But with our second novel, especially, what we kind of did was created like a place that didn't really exist. We made up a town. It's based on, it's kind of based on Italy, but it's got a lot of other places in it, and I think I started trying to see like my inability to find a place as like a feature, not a bug. Like it had to be something that I could like lean into and be like, okay, no, I don't have a instinctive setting for any of my fiction. How can I make that something more interesting for me and for readers versus a kind of a gap? Yeah.
Can I ask a material question about that, which is that when you're selling novels into different territories, does the placelessness or your kind of your deracination as a writer, people don't necessarily know you're Australian, but you haven't lived in Australia for such a long time, and the placelessness of your fiction, does that present a problem, or is it does it present opportunities for you?
Yeah, I think our primary agent is American, and my primary publishing market is the US, which is kind of strange, and that sort of happened quite randomly. It was just the agent that we connected with who sent the email after I published a short story happened to be American, and so it happened that way. I think obviously the US publishing scene in many ways does offer more opportunities. Certainly it has more money than other scenes, so I feel like that kind of was helpful in some ways. I find this thing where the UK claims Australia really, really frustrating. There was never kind of, every now and then we sort of raise with our agents, could you please maybe consider like going to some of the, wonderful and interesting and cool Australian publishing houses out there first. But I think because we've never written a very Australian novel, they don't really see any reason to do that. And in the same way, the Australian publishing scene tends to not take a huge amount of interest in me, because they're kind of like, who is this random person who's got a really terrible accent and, you know, writes about us maybe once in a blue moon, often to tell us off. So yeah, it's kind of, it feels like a gift in some ways, and, you know, I also live and work in Europe. It's certainly easier to work with the kind of American and British kind of publishing scenes, just in terms of geography and time zones and things like that. But I do find it frustrating sometimes to be sort of cut off from Australia or Australia's scene. And I was just back there. I flew into Berlin on Wednesday evening, which is why you'll have to gently allow me to be very jet lagged. But yeah, I was back there for Melbourne Writers Festival, and it was really like, it felt really wonderful to be like, no, this is also the country that I'm from, and this is the kind of stuff that I want to talk about with my writing. It's relevant to me, and, you know, I have strong feelings about it. But yeah, in a kind of literal and logistical way, my writing tends to be much more distributed by and controlled by American and British contracts.
Tessa, how does, you live in Hamburg, but you're often in Berlin. How do these places show up in your work, materially, spiritually, thematically, linguistically?
I think I'm just very literal with that. The places that I've actually been to show up in my work. So I'm often more interested in going to places than actually being in places. So I noticed that, for example, the collection I'm working on now is tentatively called The Raft, and it's about this sort of nowhere place. Also, the poems feature trains, planes, automobiles, buses, you know, cars, whatever. So yeah, I think my work is much more about being not in a place, to be honest. But yeah, it's a kind of restlessness that's just in there, I think.
And do you have kind of like strong literary connections and communities back in New Zealand?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I was just thinking about that. I wasn't really interested in writing when I lived in New Zealand. It was something that happened to me when I went to Australia, so that was nice. Then I worked as a designer, and then I became interested in writing poetry. And so I'm completely outside of that whole New Zealand kind of scene, apart from the people I've met here, like Henny Moana Baker, who Alex talked about, in Berlin. I literally have no New Zealand context. It's kind of strange.
It's interesting, but it's so apparent in your work, the place that New Zealand is so apparent in your work.
Yeah.
And do you think that the distance and the time that you've spent away from New Zealand helps you imagine and inhabit?
I mean, I worry that everything I write about New Zealand is kind of fake, you know, because I have been away for so long. Like my adult life is not there. So it's kind of, it has to be a sort of nostalgic New Zealand, I think, that I'm writing about. Yeah.
Barbara, firstly, how does Berlin show up in your work, or not, consciously or unconsciously? Start with that one, and then I'll ask you something else.
It doesn't really appear in my work at all. I find Berlin has allowed me to look at Australia with a different lens, because it's so far away, and that distance is very important for me to be able to connect with Australia as a land, and also it shapes my experiences in Australia have shaped a lot of what I'm writing.
And do you go back frequently, or is it a kind of duration of absence that makes it possible for you to write so viscerally about the Australian landscape? Or are you visiting and taking notes?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on a farm before I left, so this book is kind of about that. It's fictional, but it was a very thankful setting, and it does appear quite a lot. but I haven't been, I went back last year for a holiday, but before that I didn't go back for 7 years. Yeah.
And do you feel connected to Australian literary communities there or here more?
I must say here, which is odd. I really enjoy events held by the reader here, and retreats and things like that. And there's a really nice community of writers here. Whereas over there, I don't really know anyone, but I have sent the book out, obviously, back to Sydney and different places. And of course, because it's so set in Australia and it's quite an Australian theme, I do get a response to that.
And do you feel connected to German writers and readers here?
I do, yeah. So I have been very lucky to meet quite a lot of writers, German writers here.
I actually want to ask the rest of the panel about your experiences with communities of German writers here. Do you interact? Are you participating? Is this a part of your kind of social and literary life?
Not really, to be honest. It's more, first of all, it's actually more in Berlin, but it's more the international people that I know here. So there's a really little, sadly, kind of crossover.
Yeah, I would say probably the same thing, which is regretful. I wish there was like maybe you'll have to teach us your secrets of how you cross over.
You want the real story? Yeah. So my ex is a writer, an author, Berlin-based, and she has 2 novels out. And through her, I met a lot of different German authors as well. So, that's how I kind of fell into the scene. Yeah.
Date a German writer.
Yes.
Do that.
Taking notes.
I guess because it's 2025, we can't really talk about place without talking about the internet and the kind of like the place or non-place of the internet that I think for a lot of expats makes it possible to live in various parts of the world and be tethered to other economies, other tax regimes, whatever. And I'm wondering how you're kind of, it can also make it possible to like live in a place for a long time and like not really integrate or, and so I'm interested in how you live online, what the place is for you, what it kind of gives you and what it takes from you as a writer, as an artist, and as a kind of like an embodied citizen.
Yeah, I feel very much like I was of a generation where it was possible to grow up online, but kind of prior to social media, at least as we understand social media today, which actually is something that I'm kind of weirdly nostalgic about now. Like I think in the days of like forum posts and live journal, we didn't kind of realize, it wasn't like the internet was like a kind of utopian land, but it was certainly, I think, a lot more comfortable and a lot nicer than it is today. And also very anonymous, which was kind of interesting as a writer growing up. I remember like an internet friend, being like, can I send you like a letter? And me kind of being like, okay, but I'm going to have to work out how to smuggle it past my parents because I told them that I wouldn't give anyone on the internet my real name. And then you think about, today's teenagers, I think, have Instagram accounts from, I don't know, earlier than teenagers. So I feel really comfortable in the internet, and I really love it as a space of closeness. It's certainly made it much easier in the very visceral sense of missing home to be closer to home if you can call your family, if you can talk to them easily. I talked about my parents living here in the 90s. The reason that they moved back to Australia is because they missed family so much. And my mum always kind of says, if I'd waited another year, email was kind of popularized and things might have been different. But I find myself retreating a lot from the internet now. I don't love social media. I especially don't love the pressure for writers to kind of be a brand on social media. I find it really exhausting and I'm bad at it. So it's kind of a place that no longer feels sort of interesting and creative. And then the other thing, I guess, is we were talking about this backstage, but if you had a book come out in COVID, then the internet was where you promoted that book. And that was not a fun time, like having to, instead of being in a lovely room like this one, having to kind of get on a Zoom and then close the Zoom, and you're just sitting in your apartment feeling kind of weird about everything.
And then the horrible video lives on forever.
Truly. They should take that down.
They're going to take it down.
So,
humiliating.
Yeah, I think the internet is a place that I've retreated from, but it feels very present in my head, and I will always be a writer who grew up on the internet. Those kind of languages and rhythms are really baked into my work, and there's something kind of fun about that.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, if you're working online, you can work in another country.
Yeah.
And you,
Exactly.
Tessa.
I was just going to say, I'm older than you, and I grew up without the internet, so that makes me, a dinosaur, but also just a completely different relationship to it. For me, it's kind of a place where I have to really think, okay, how does this work? What's happening here? I have to engage with it, and it feels, I don't know, I have a kind of anxiety around it, to be honest, just to share that with everyone here. It doesn't feel like a place I want to be, It doesn't really give much to my work in that way. But having said that, it's how we, publicize our work, isn't it? It's essential to use it, I guess, without being used by it.
Bomb the servers. Barbara, how do you live or not live online or in the place or non-place of the internet?
I don't really have much of a presence on the internet. I mainly use it just to inform myself of what's coming out in terms of different books, different authors in different places. I don't post much about myself except maybe recipes and photos from holidays, but it doesn't really, I don't use it so much for my writing. I might advertise here and there something coming up. But
what about the kind of para-writing work that you're doing as an editor? Are you working online for Anglophone companies?
No, I work, I'm a freelance editor as well. I have my own company in Australia.
Yeah. Okay.
And people just approach me through my website, which is listed in some author places where people are looking for specific services. So I do engage with that. That's been very, very helpful. But yeah, in terms of writing, I haven't posted so much.
One thing I want to ask is about the cultural cringe, and if it appears in your unconscious. The cultural cringe is a term to describe a particular Australian form of cultural aggression, whereby an artist is only taken seriously and legitimised by their success abroad, and that's when an Australian audience can finally take them seriously. And I wonder if there's private aspirations that you have to be recognised abroad first, or if it doesn't play into your work at all, your ego, or if you've experienced a kind of a sense of alienation from Australia and New Zealand because you've left as an artist. Maybe that's very personal. Does anyone feel comfortable?
I can talk. I think it's a weird kind of one. I think you every writer I know has daydreams about some form of success, or there's some hurdle that's kind of in front of them that they really want to cross. I remember for a long time I had this almost this countdown in the back of my head that was sort of okay, you've turned this age and you haven't got a book deal, you've turned this age and you haven't got a book deal, and then I got the book deal and the countdown went away for maybe 2.5 months, the most peaceful 2.5 months of my life, and then it just came back with something new. And so I think, of course there is success and ambition and goals that you want to see in various places. I'm not sure if I particularly differentiate them between countries. I think also, there's stuff I think the US obviously has a kind of disproportional hitting power in terms of like the literary scene and stuff like that. I'm also not sure it would be that fun to be super successful with the American audience right now. That's not a place that I would love to go on tour at the moment. So I think I don't feel so, like I have a lot of kind of entangled emotions about Australia and about my reception in Australia as an Australian author, and whether that's something I want more or indeed less of. But I don't think of the kind of competitiveness. It's not as centered around particular goals or particular things that I want recognition for, if that makes sense.
I was just going to say, I think with poetry, there's a kind of freedom from success. You know, it's not about success, which is nice, you know. But I was going to say, it's more about community, actually, and building something that's a bit realer than, you know, I mean, it would be nice to be published by Penguin or any other legacy publishing house that happens to be here, but yeah, it's not really about that, for me, at least.
Barbara?
Yeah, so I used to submit my manuscript to different places in the UK and also Australia, not so much the US. I just didn't feel comfortable. I just don't really understand that market at all. So, of course, UK, because technically it's closer. If I was going to publish, there'd be readings there and things like that. Australia, it just made more sense to send the book there because of the themes in it. But yeah, I guess people have asked, you know, if you get published here, how are you going to do all these readings, or how are you going to promote if you're on the other side of the world? So I do get that question a lot from people over there. They haven't treated it so much as a hindrance, but I can see that it can become one. So it does, I mean, a lot of planning and scheduling would have to be done in some way, but I'm not crossing that bridge yet.
When is the book coming out?
Oh, it's currently in progress.
Okay.
So, yeah, I will have to send it back to the publisher and see.
And when it does, you presumably have to go there.
Then I would have to, yeah. So.
Can I chime in with a hot cringe take?
Please.
I've got the feeling in recent years that the cultural cringe thing has flipped around a bit in our literary world, and that if you're someone who's pissed off and have success somewhere else, people don't think you're, probably quite rightly, think you've already got stuff we don't really need an interest in.
I agree.
You agree? And then people say, well, we have this thing called the cultural cringe, where but it becomes an excuse actually to narrow our horizons sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
That's my hot take.
Wait, Alex, am I supposed to be including you in this conversation?
I included myself. That's all right. No, not really.
I'd like to open the floor and ask if anyone has any questions for these amazing authors, or any comments, or if you'd like to share your own experiences of...
This is a situation we are not prepared for.
Oh, really?
No, because we are... at the beginning of our event, I explained that we are recording everything. So it would have needed a mic or something. So I'm a little bit surprised now by your idea. So we can do that, but then you have to come up here and please speak the question into the mic if you are encouraged enough.
Does anyone feel brave enough to speak at the plinth? Okay. Perhaps not. A lot to ask.
I have a question I'd like.
Yes.
If that's okay. Well, people get brave. I'm interested in partly the experience of being here. People come to you. You meet people who have received ideas about Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand, and some of that's Germans with, as we've said before, Kiwis and kangaroos and everything. Sometimes that's Americans or English. Sometimes it's stereotypes you've never even heard of because they're from another small country that we also don't know about. Do you ever find yourself intellectually or in your work feeling these assumptions that people have from afar about where you're from and think, does it guide you at all that you often encounter people who have perspectives on our homelands from afar.
I feel like I kind of like to lean into it a little bit. I think Australia is a absurd country, and it's good that we all acknowledge that, you know, and it's nice to kind of get affronted when someone comes and says, you know, like, have you seen a kangaroo, like, is there a kangaroo in your back garden or something, and be like, well, no, but one time I did have to, like, call off a school assembly because a wild one got in. Like, I think it's something to kind of like lean into and embrace a bit, but it's an interesting question of whether it comes up in the writing. And I think I feel like I almost have the opposite, where sometimes writing feels very vulnerable, and I kind of have a bit of a like, well, catch me if you can instinct, and I don't want people to be able to find me in the text, which I don't think is necessarily a good instinct. I think that's something that I need to maybe get a little bit braver about, but I feel like I'm kind of trying to shy away from people's ideas and from people's projections of Australianness, and maybe I should lean in a little bit more and let the kangaroo in the assembly run free.
It is a kind of interesting situation, because I think as Anglophones and as kind of settler colonists, we are both hegemonic and also a bit peripheral to the kind of the real cultural capitals of the Anglosphere, which are, you know, New York and London. And so there's a sense that we can kind of take advantage of that, but also get away with things and sort of disappear and be invisible, but also be participating in you know, a kind of economy in a world that a lot of people are excluded from, and that is quite a privileged bubble, linguistic, cultural empire.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of freedom in being on the edges of something.
Yeah.
You can kind of just go crazy and nobody minds what you're doing down there in some ways. But maybe you could ask can you rephrase the question? Because I'm not sure that I can answer it, but I'd like to try.
When you live abroad for a long time, you meet people who have weird ideas about where you're from.
Yeah.
Find yourself either wanting to counter them or finding them actually kind of true through this alienation effect.
I am true. I mean, the thing that I often hear is the sheep thing and the usual things.
I don't think our guests know about the sheep.
What? I mean, it's just I thought that was a well-known thing. Okay. See?
Trying to trick you into saying it.
The ratio of people to sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we won't go into it. But it doesn't bother me, really. I don't mind. I'm happy to correct people if they come with the... I mean, although I would say that I never get negative reactions from people when I say I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand. But people do have some kind of unhelpfully romanticised idea of what it is like. And to be honest, it's just a country with politicians and traffic jams, and it's just struggling with its own post-colonial moment. You know, it's more complicated than sheep. Just say it like that.
Yeah, I also just get the same type of stereotypes about spiders and snakes, and people don't want to go with me on holidays because they think they're going to get attacked by something. So it's very hard to get that idea out of their minds. It seems to be firmly rooted, especially if they haven't travelled anywhere over. So that's kind of the only thing that I get faced with. Yeah.
Does anyone have any final comments or ideas that they'd like to discuss? If not, I might introduce the poet who's going to conclude this session. Marty Hiatt is a poet and translator from Naarm, Melbourne. He's the author of Paraphrenia and numerous self-published chapbooks by a bulk press, including Hardline, Back to Noise, Notes Away, and most recently, Sectioned, and some actual fucking poems. Canning Editions published his translation of Natalie Quintaine's Tomatoes in 2022. He works with the Gegensatz Translation Collective and has worked with Artichoke Poetry and translating translation reading series in Berlin and received a research stipend for non-German literature from the Berliner Senate in 2021. He's also the author of Maurice Blanchot, Three Terrors, published by SUNY Press this year. And he's going to read from... What are you going to read from? Let's find out.
I'm going to read. I'm going to read some Freedom from Success. I'm just going to read 2 poems. Carnival Song. Pillars of bog upholding, the party is held. The party is held up by pillars of bog, fish carcasses, pillars of bog and fish carcasses, guts and bones, party atop the pillars of bog, and cake and fish carcasses. Storm came over, came in, storm of wrecked bodies borne on by their own cries, belted by great pillars of cake, until they rained down on the party, lusting for flesh and whipped cream. It is not over yet. Fish spirits float in flutes like liquid pillars, the guts cut open to swallow them, to the music of flutes and bones. The host descends upon the party, ringed by pillars of cake and cream, the host anointed with fish blood. There'll still be time for new gore, after flesh storm clears, after belts run slack, after bones are sunk into the bog. There's no need to cry, all flesh is a signal. Quickened by fish and licked like whipped cream, there's no need to cry, mute bones and mute flutes, all flesh is a signal. Cut it open to mean, to rove and roam over the music of the storm. The music of the storm, it is not over yet. The party was held up over the music of the bog. The flesh was held up by belts and by spirits and by lust. The host was a whipping spirit roving the bog of meat, raining cake on the wrecked bodies upholding the pillars. New gore is patient, it is not over yet. New music lusts for wrecked bodies, pillars of wrecked bodies, holding up the party, holding up the cake. The signal of their cries, like flute cut open and mute, their cries are caught in a sack like bones. The sack ascends the pillars to the party, to the host. It is not over yet. The ring is dipped in gore and held up. The host is patient. The host anoints the patient, bound by whips and belts with cake and gore. The host opens the sack. Bones and cries whip the ears of the party. The party whips and belts the patient. The patient is patient. The patient patiently plays the part before the party. All flesh is a signal. The party whips and belts the patient. The party plays the part. The flesh parted swallows the music of the cries. The music of the cries. It is not over yet. Cream is whipped and mixed with gore. The whip plays the part. The whip plays the patient. Bones and cries whip the ears of the party. The bones play the part. The cries play the part. Guts and gore reign over the bog. It is not over yet. The party is held up, the cake is held up, the meat is held up, the guts are held up, the ring is held up, the bank is held up, the new spirit is patient, the signal is patient, the patient is held up, guts and gore reign over the bog. It is not over yet. All flesh is music. Let's dance. One last tirade. A moving, permanent conjuncture moving in me, daguerreotype sprite, in 8-bit landscape, whose nails are flakes, whose taut gauze of self with shit for thought sees other streamer ones graciously cut through stone to relay what is common, trying to hang on to the sun's grey spokes in the great among, trying to hang on by a screwdriver jammed into a power socket, and being held through the snoot to the magenta eye of the beamer, always bracketed with no abatement in one of them nested nets by the arc station, which is also about having a numb face and hyperventilating in a barrel and a safe onward journey and breathe normally, burn and run, abolish rhetoric with mega exaggeration, a weak invincibility, miscoded as mercury, dodging the whipping systems randomly configured each time, on vortex isle, veiled in stolen stone, to replace weight of vanished glacier. That's a reference to England. Get into it. Double the verge over to make time possible in the big silent bag of gab and acid and gas and nail bombs and artificial macrobe meteor shower against innocent people pursuing their fixations, as we saw above. Though the image shifts as virus slowly covers the pain, crushing out that circuit that stretched out the earth, given the boot by bot, which connects to previous. I'm laughing with my feels, bearing in mind the nearest exit may open into a Pyrex throat, choking on own saliva, tethered by a hooked, barbed chain of indirect objects laid out on Yorkstone crazy paving, hence doomed to nullity, the marble busts concurred. Yet the more I read, the more I questioned this story based on the murders at Spur's End. Grey sheds emerge from grey fog, minor yet total, forced back out through rare books and manuscripts to the lives, innumerable, or horizon, where we go then, with wire cutters and signs blown over, couches dumped to block the completion of any one grammar, as we saw above, like the partition ambit of red gold hair fire, recommending exomatism with no abatement to us who piss on all posts already pissed on, who plant new posts to piss on, and take powerless naps on lawnless lawn, thrumming with silks, then wake up, sortes Rhiannonae, sortes Beyonce, come out, pull out, feet high up in the ground, pay also with non-money for the sacks of white paint we like to drive through, and the other things we tend to name to become. As we simulcast our unrequited love for domination live on the incline, how it gathers at a certain arbitrary point, to spaz with Hetty the pink-faced, doe-eyed vacuum cleaner, while other paths led otherwhere, and the dust is air-blasted off, and the crowding, chatting bodies who violated each other into people are etched into light, over drinks at opening, nth mercenary hailed as hero, selling jellyfish just his day job, rules of civilian slaughter questioned by Professor of American Global Interest Studies, romping in open, cold playground, had his uncle hung in 2013 after a collective hallucination led to the collapse of the front. Other people in other buildings go through same process of no moment, horizontal sludge puzzle always bracketed, no more than a symbolic gesture propping us down, feet high up in the ground, while we mull our next error. This one, minor yet total, to be laid out in a play, on a stage, in a city, on a planet, in the distant future. Here are 6,000 generations of electronic devices made of rare earth minerals, mined by poisoned baby slaves for you to use on Vortex Isle while you wait, like Notebook and the people out walking through games of debt and prams who left Megamart countryside to be rug gitter filament, to present in this quiet, sprawling, light, momentous field of indulgence, and courteously share toxins to write our sadness in the mild indignity of spring. And you move through too, light as a soiled nappy, perched unspecial thanks to splint in its senseless breadth, sipping faces and bricks and colour in the soft pleasure of separation and bottlenecks and disregarded local regulation, beak to button, and they have an organ that snatches your life and death and spits out nothing but gauze letters, spent fuel tanks, and decommissioned satellites, to which you add something else. No, the other. Mudding up my screen, showing Mum's anguish, she's here today, returning from commendation ceremony, thumbs hooked in belt to word dart, the dumb animal of you. Half baby, half washed up fuddy-duddy, handled with kid gloves, whom they taught to kill with white vinyl love and a certain taught enunciation of success, in soft bunker of hatred, with vulnerable armoury out back of the imperial garden, where lanced lion vomits and what look like postures are forms of survival, bodies configured and patched all over with wily vacuums, faces grazed by black plastic, and rots condensation, fed cardboard and cork with side of human liver sauce, taking notes together and taking notes apart, and scrambling to hand them on to the mounted slumlords trampling us down. We cannot wait to know. First exterminate, then negotiate. Tombs strewn like grains of silicon, marble still the welter of them, clinking where you are in the exclave outdoor studio, making work before sense and after it. Edging fence marks boundary between trash and trash, but marks are beautiful, punctuating everywhere, in the open, haunted still, near amenities zone run bare as by cattle, and lightly trashed, and open, and wide, and covered in a thin off-white shimmering web of human trash, improving dust and dirt with punctuation anywhere, for the gutted, griefing chines adrift in total metaphor, waiting, like notebook, under moderate haze of off-white human flesh spaced through the bus's paperback third gear, and other obliquities held out of frame or mounted over crossing as homing missiles chase each other. Some are passenger missiles, service terrible, target random, but tickets cheap. We continue to respond to the unprecedented with staggered gossip, scared as catalogues, patient as construction waste, clinking down debris chute toward photocopied earth and its pitiless chains, engulfed in people heaping up loss that gathers, vanishes, gathers inside a vac-packed latex sack of body parts, metal vents, plush pleats, and dwellings made of rain-dried toilet tissue strung over fallen twigs and Rolodex implanted near Kidney Field. Dumb, alive, and bare, I'm Times Media, not right protected, writing soft cream jelly from land of darkness, forest of Abkhazia, for surveillance cameras. I gift hardness to the tender of scars that are still wounds, and return the stare of the escape chair on the mezzanine. Bail water bright into sea, hold anus up to cupula, hole that lets light in, speed up, flash of mirrors then black.
Thank you so much for this performance, Marty Hiatt. The German translation was made by our editor, Joey Balsen. Thank you very much, by the way. If this was too fast for you and you already forgot the title of the first poem or something like that, we can help you because we have a multilingual online magazine. It's called Stadtsprachen, stadtsprachen.de. And there we will publish not only the keynotes of the last two panels in German and English. You can find it already there, but we will also publish some of the translation and texts that we will listen to during this program. So watch out for the next issue of Stadtsprachen.de. It's free, it's online, and it will be out at the end of June. So every 3 months we usually have a new issue. And while waiting, you can read a lot of other stuff there. In Berlin, we have 190 languages spoken, and in most of them, literature is written also. Some of it you can find in our magazine. This is the goal. We want to publish unknown but interesting literature from Berlin written in other languages than German, because this is what we have here, and this panel was a proof for it. So thank you very much for this panel with the title Home and Away. I learned this is also a series that I have to watch. Home and Away, Berlin writing between not only Austalgia, but also New Zealand Talgia, Aotearoa Talgia, something like that, and expatriotism. This is something that really keeps together the whole discussion in a way. Yeah? So there's not much Australian patriotism. So most of the down under authors seem to be at home in the world, in a way. Yeah, no matter where, they even can survive in Berlin. And thank you very much, also for the keynote, Alexander Wells. Thank you very much, Barbara Ivusic, Mikaella, Clements, Tessa, Sinclair, Scott, and of course, charming Ellena Savage. Thank you for this panel.
Parataxe digital.